something and they don't have what they need, so they reach from here and they get it. But when you talk about the God, you're talking about someone who does not need anything. Everything is His. That's a part of the meaning of the Arabic attribute of samad, the self-sufficient, or the source of all things, as-samad. And what happens when you explain that to people? You tell them what I've just said. You say, well, look, God doesn't need anything. He has what He needs. He doesn't have to make special arrangements to look after problems. In fact, if you quote to them the ayah of the Qur'an, as it says several times, it says, God forgives whom He chooses. They'll put words in your mouth because it's how they hear it. They say, oh, your God is arbitrary. He forgives whoever He likes. See, to them, when they hear that phrase, God forgives whom He chooses, it makes them think of a human being who He looks over a crowd of sinners and He says, well, I'll forgive this one and this one, but not this one. I don't like his looks. And this one, no, wait, I changed my mind. I will forgive this one, but not this one. That's what it means to them when they hear God forgives whom He chooses. That's not the meaning of that phrase. Wrapped up in the meaning of that is the thing I was just talking about. It means nothing prevents God from forgiving. He forgives whom He chooses. Nobody can say, wait, before you try to forgive that one, look, you haven't thought of this. Or you can't because, look, He forgives whom He chooses. He doesn't choose like we decide what we're going to have for dessert tomorrow night or something. As a matter of fact, the Qur'an tells us you can be sure of that. It talks about the sunnah of Allah. The sunnah of Allah. That means the characteristic behavior, the habit of Allah. And it reminds you that it never changes. It is completely consistent. It's not arbitrary. What He does is what He always does. Given the exact same set of circumstances, He will do the same thing every time. His sunnah is invariable. It's not arbitrary. So, having talked a great deal about sin and all that sort of thing, which I say it bothers some people very much, what usually happens is, instead of giving an answer to some of these difficulties, or adding up everything I've said and trying to talk about that, people usually start trying to find out, why did you say that? They start looking for your motives. People say, no, look, the reason you've said all that is because, and then they've got a whole list of different things. It doesn't really matter why I say it. It still needs to be answered. You see, even if the devil tells you something, it isn't an excuse to say, I don't have to answer you, you're the devil. No, if somebody raises a question, then you have to reply to it. You have to do something about it. You're supposed to confront false with truth. But instead, people look for motives. I was invited one time to speak to a Bible school in central Canada, or the prairies in Manitoba. And I talked about a lot of things, and when it was finished, the teacher took me aside, and we're standing out in the hall, and he talked about still more things, and I raised still more difficulties, and finally, nobody has replied to anything. He says, well, I think, you see, what your problem is that probably you had some good Christian friends, and then some of them turned out to not be very good friends. They did wrong to you or something. They annoyed you, or they bothered you, or they hurt you, and so you left them and looked for somebody else. It's all right out of his imagination. He doesn't know me from anywhere. I said to him, well, as a matter of fact, probably the closest friends I ever had were Christians, and I miss them very much. They live a long ways away now. We never had a fight. Good friends. In fact, I imagine they'd be glad to see me again. I'd be glad to see them. And he got all worried about this. Well, then what is the reason that you say the things you say? You see, his problem is he's looking for a motive instead of answering a question. So don't be put off by that kind of thing. If you raise a question, it deserves an answer. It doesn't deserve somebody telling you why they think you said what you said. You said it because you want an answer. I mention that experience because it's related to a similar kind of situation that happens very, very often, and probably there's a lot of you have heard the very thing. You get into some discussion with the missionary, he will usually tell Muslims that your problem is you don't understand things. So the reason you're misguided is you don't understand. In particular, say you're talking about what is God. Is He three or is He one? And if the Muslim says, no, you can't say God is three, that's wrong, the missionary will often say, no, look, the problem with you Muslims is you don't understand the Trinity. You think we have three gods. No, no, no. We have one God, but He's three. Your problem is you don't understand the Trinity. If you understood it, then you'd be a Christian. Remember that a person says that when they say that, because they do. It may happen within a few minutes, or it may happen in a couple of days, but the same person will tell you, if you ask him, could you explain the Trinity to me? They will tell you, no one understands it. You see his problem? He said to you, see, if you Muslims understood the Trinity, you'd be Christians. Your problem is you don't understand it. Within 5 minutes, he'll probably tell you, no one understands it. I don't know how he thinks you're supposed to understand it. It just shows, I mean, there's two minds in one head. You see, he's telling you this, and then he becomes somebody else, and he tells you that. And the two things don't match up. Usually in aggressive missionary work, there are those who will tell the Muslims, your Qur'an says a lot of things about God as one, and it speaks against different things like worshiping three gods and calling it one, or saying that Christ is 1/3 of God and all these things. They say that, and all of that's true. See, your book doesn't actually describe the Trinity as it really is. It talks about other versions of the Trinity, the ones we don't even believe in. So the problem is the Trinity is not really mentioned in the Qur'an. The real Trinity is not mentioned in there. And if you ask him, well, how does the real Trinity go? He starts giving you an elaborate explanation. He said, no, see, the real Trinity works like this. And it will take him, as I say, it'll take him that many words to explain to you what the real thing is supposed to be like. And when he gives you all these words and all this vocabulary to explain the Trinity, they say, you see, now the Qur'an doesn't say that, so the real Trinity is not in there. The problem is it doesn't say that in the Bible either. I mean, he said so many words, you can't find those words in the Bible. If you took a scissors and cut out every word in the Bible one piece at a time, and then took tape and glued it all together, you still couldn't make it say that. Those words aren't even in there. So he's made his own problem just bigger. Now again, remember, I'm talking about a certain type of person. You've got a great many people who see it otherwise, who are quite honest within the churches. Just within the last few months, the leading intellect in the Catholic Church, Hans Küng, and this is sort of the brains of the Catholic Church for a generation, just recently he finished studying the Qur'an. You know what he said about it? He said, God has spoken to man through the man Muhammad. It's the brains of the Catholic Church. There are honest people within the churches, so don't think I'm down on everybody. I get Christian ministers who come to me sometimes and they say, can you give me the name and address of the person who said that thing that you mentioned? Because I want to go tell him he's wrong. Some people do care about the truth. Well, maybe more generally, how do people misunderstand Islam? Instead of talking about maybe some technical details or something. Often the reason that Islam is misunderstood is because, again, of the impression it gives people, it looks like something they don't think religion should look like. To give an example, it bothers a lot of people very much when they, if it ever comes to their attention, as it often does, that usually in any translation of the Qur'an, you'll find written on the same page, within about that much space on the page, instructions about prayer and instructions about using the toilet. That really bothers them. Because, well, prayer is holy, but the toilet, what's that doing in a holy book? See? It's because they've got this idea that somehow the world is horrible and evil, and we've got to leave it